Welcome to episode 24 of Duties of the Heart, and we're up to chapter 4 in The Gate of Serving God. And in this chapter, which is quite a long chapter, we're going to have to split this into 2 episodes. So the first section of this chapter discusses or explains the form of stimulus employed by studying Torah, the various levels of its students, or those who study its wisdom, their characteristics, their belief in it, and their acceptance of it. So it's an analytical look at people who study Torah and the various aspects of that. So he begins. It is now fitting that we explain the form of the stimulus employed by the Torah, the parts of the Torah, the various levels of those who study its wisdom, their characteristics, their belief in it, and their acceptance of it. The stimulus of the Torah is a revelation from God through the medium of a certain individual amongst human beings about the service to be rendered by them to him that would be pleasing in his sight, so that he may bestow upon them, for their acceptance of it, a reward in this world and the next, as an expression of his kindness, generosity, and grace. The Torah divides all human actions into 3 groups: commands, prohibitions, and permitted acts. Commands are divided into 2 groups. Number 1, duties of the heart, the things that are made possible through the belief of the heart, such as acknowledgement of God's unity, being wholehearted with Him, trusting in Him, giving oneself over to Him, accepting His decree, believing in His prophets and in His Torah, revering Him, keeping His commandments, contemplating His wonders, reflecting on His favors, and many similar duties too numerous to mention. And number 2, duties of the heart and limbs together, such as consistency of heart and tongue, reading and studying the Torah, prayer, fasting and charity, rest from labor on Shabbos and festivals, fulfilling the precepts of Sukkah, Lulav, Tzitzit and the like. Prohibitions are also divided into 2 groups. Number 1, duties of the heart, and number 2, duties of the limbs. Prohibitions from amongst the duties of the heart are, for example, secretly associating the worship of anything else with the worship of God, hypocrisy, loving to do that which God has forbidden us to do, arrogance, haughtiness and pride, ridiculing people, mocking the prophets and the words of revelation which they speak, abhorring good and those who do good, finding pleasure in evildoers, jealousy, covetousness, and the desire to hurt people, resentment at the Creator's decrees, and the like. Prohibitions from amongst the duties of the limbs are, for example, openly associating anything else with God, swearing falsely, lying and gossiping, eating forbidden food, forbidden sexual intercourse, bloodshed, and the like. Permitted acts are divided into 3 groups: meeting one's needs, excessiveness, and deficiency. Number 1, that which meets one's needs is that which is indispensable to a person for the preservation of his body and the management of his circumstances, such as food and drink, clothing and shelter, speech, which he needs to conduct his affairs, activities and commercial transactions, and all kinds of physical movements. All these employed according to need and in proper measure, so as to secure one's welfare, as the scripture says from Psalms 112 verse 5. Good is the man who is generous and lends, who conducts his affairs with judgment. Number 2, excessiveness in things permitted is where one crosses the limit of the necessary into the superfluous, what man has no need for, such as overindulgence in food and drink. King Solomon has already warned us of this, saying, from Proverbs 23 verse 20, "Be not amongst those who drink wine to excess, or among gluttonous eaters of meat." Also, extravagant adornment in dress, overly large homes, excessive talk, in which one cannot be sure that one will not stumble, as King Solomon said, also in Proverbs 10 verse 19, when there is too much talk, mistakes are not lacking. He also mentions in Proverbs 29:3 regarding sexual immoderation, he who keeps the company of harlots loses wealth. And also from Proverbs, do not give your strength to women. And also Scripture says of the king in Deuteronomy 17 verse 17, he should not have many wives. Further examples of excessiveness: striving to multiply possessions and to accumulate money. Of this it is said in Proverbs 23 verse 4, do not toil to get wealth. Of your own understanding desist. And also Scripture says of the king in Deuteronomy 17:17, nor shall he greatly multiply for himself silver and gold. Whatever we have mentioned above is conducive to the body's well-being, and pleasure is in the end contemptible, for it brings a man to that which the Creator has warned him against and forbidden him. Number 3, deficiency in things permitted is where one does not reach the level of basic necessity in food and drink, clothing, marital relations, talk, sleep, securing one's subsistence and the like. This is divided into two kinds. It may be for the sake of piety or for worldly consideration. When it is for the sake of piety and to draw near to God by way of abstinence, it is praiseworthy and rewarded. As King Solomon said in Ecclesiastes 7 verse 4, the thoughts of the wise are in the house of mourning, the thoughts of fools are in the house of mirth. When it is for worldly considerations, to save money, or to be praised as one who abstains from what is permitted and takes from the world less than his bodily sustenance, it is contemptible, for he departs from the middle path and harms his body, all out of excessive love for this world. One of the wise has said, whoever abstains from the world for the love of the world is like one who would put out a fire with a straw. As for talk and sleep, abbreviated use of them is praiseworthy. Talk because in the end silence is better. As the wise man said, also in, I think it was Ecclesiastes 5:1, do not rush into your speech, nor let your heart be hasty to utter a word before God. For God is in heaven and you are on earth. So let your words be few. And of sleep it is said in Proverbs 6 verses 10 to 11, a little more sleep, a little more slumber, a little longer with hands folded to rest, and your poverty will come like a runner. You need like an armed man. It is now clear from what has been stated that all human actions are either commanded, prohibited, or meant to secure some basic need. For whatever deviates from the bounds of the necessary, either towards excessiveness or towards deficiency, can be nothing other than a command, if it be for the sake of heaven, or a prohibition, if it is not for the sake of heaven. Upon further examination of the basic need to draw sustenance from the world, we find that we are commanded to do so, as it says in the beginning of the account of creation from Genesis 1 verse 28, be fruitful and multiply, fill the land and subdue it. Also from Genesis 1 verse 29, behold, I have given you every seed-bearing plant on the face of all the earth. Thus, securing one's need for food is included in the category of the commanded. Since this is so, it is now evident that all human actions are either commanded or prohibited. Let us explain. Whoever performs a given act, if it is commanded, it is a good deed, and if he refrains from doing it while he is able to meet his duty, he acts inadequately. Whoever does something that is prohibited is a sinner. Whoever abstains from doing it is righteous, provided that he abstains out of fear of God. As it says in Tehillim 119 verse 3, those who refrain from doing wrong walk in his ways, as in God's ways. If he performs a permitted act in moderation and proper measure, he is righteous. As it says, good is the man who is generous and lends who conducts his affairs with judgment. This is from Tehillim 112. If he does it in excess and goes beyond the bounds of the necessary, he fails, for this leads to which God has warned him against. And if he denies himself what is necessary when he is in a position to secure it, if his intention is to discipline his soul in the service of God and to master his baser instincts so as to draw near to God or separate from this world and incline towards the next, he is righteous and his conduct is good. But if it is not for the sake of heaven, he fails and his conduct is contemptible. We now see that all human actions are divided into those that are good and those that are evil. An intelligent individual is one who weighs his actions before he does them, according to this standard, who first evaluates them with his mind, and then chooses what is good amongst them, giving up the rest. As King David said in Tehillim 119, I consider my ways, and I turn my feet to your testimonies. I hasten and do not delay to observe your commandments. Proof of the veracity of this division of deeds into good and evil is found in the wise man's statements from Ecclesiastes 12 verse 4. For God will bring to judgment every deed according to its hidden intention, whether good or evil. He classifies here all deeds as either good or evil. This coincides with what we have called praiseworthy in character or contemptible. It has thus been explained that all human actions are divided into the two parts of the Torah, meaning the commandments and prohibitions exclusively. And now he's going to continue and discuss or describe the 10 levels of students of the Torah. He begins, as the Torah consists of words and meanings, people are ranked according to their wisdom in Torah on 10 levels. The first level are people who study the Chumash and the rest of scriptures and are satisfied with their ability to read the text without understanding the meaning. They do not know the meaning of the words, nor are they acquainted with the usage of the language. Their level is that of a donkey carrying books. The second level are people who try to read correctly and follow the vowels, and who concentrate most of their efforts on learning the methods of vocalization. They are the masters of vocalization and the Mitzorah. The third level, people who, recognizing the insufficiency of the previously mentioned levels, try to understand the reasons behind vocalization and accentuation. In addition, they seek to acquire knowledge of language usage and grammar, nouns and verbs, modifying parts of speech, which are prepositions, conjunctions and adverbs, absolute and construct forms of nouns and adjectives, the use of the future to express the past, and of the infinitive to express the imperative, the different kinds of verbs, complete, all 3 letters sounded, defective, 1 letter omitted, silent, 1 or 2 letters not sounded, duplicate, verbs with the second and third letters the same, the apparent and the hidden, closed and open syllables, and former ending in a consonant, the latter in a vowel sound, and the like. The fourth level are people who add to what has been mentioned previously, the explanation of the difficult words in scriptures and the plain sense of the text, and who, in addition, investigate the figurative and the literal meaning of words in the Hebrew language, the homonyms and synonyms, the derivative nouns, primary nouns, irregular nouns, and so with adjectives and verbs and the like. The fifth level are people who add to what has been mentioned previously the knowledge of the meaning of the scriptures, the understanding of its principles, the investigation of metaphorical and literal meanings, such as the anthropomorphic expressions in scripture. They are the ones who interpret God's book according to its plain sense, without reference to the traditional interpretation. The sixth level are people who rely on the tradition of the early ones, namely the Mishnah, and attain knowledge of some of the Torah obligations, commandments and laws, without consulting the Talmud. The seventh level, people who add to all that has been mentioned the study of the Talmud. They devote themselves to reciting its texts and reading its decisions, without answering the questions that arise or resolving its difficulties. The 8th level are people who are not satisfied with the knowledge of the Torah that satisfies those mentioned previously, but who exert themselves to understand the words of the Talmudic masters, to answer the questions and resolve the difficulties, in order to gain through its fame and honor. They ignore the duties of the heart and are not vigilant in regard to what is detrimental to right conduct. They spend their days in the study of bizarre, hypothetical matters which require new applications of previous rulings, the study of rare and complex legal decisions, and they recount the arguments of the Talmudic masters on novel points of law. Meanwhile, they neglect to study what they have no right to ignore from among matters which touch upon their souls, matters which they are obligated to investigate, such as the truth of the prophet's signs, the tradition and the conditions through which it is demonstrated. They neglect the duty imposed on us by the Creator to bring proofs of Him with the intellect and to serve Him with a perfect heart, and many similar duties which can be grasped by way of the intellect, which I will explain in this gate. The 9th level are people who exert themselves to know the duties of the heart and limbs, and what is detrimental to right conduct, who understand the plain sense of the Holy Scriptures as well as their inner meaning, who verify the truth of the tradition based on Scripture and on reason, who systemize the laws and classify the practical duties as befitting the conditions of every time and the different practices of every place, after understanding the fundamental principles of the Torah, abiding by them and exhorting others in their regard, who accord with the truth inwardly and outwardly, and follow it wherever it may lead. They are the Talmudic masters and the Gaonim, who continued their predecessors' ways. The 10th level are people who have inherited from the prophets the wisdom of the Torah, with all its interpretations and the branches of its fundamental principles. They are the men of the Great Assembly and those Tanaim who received the traditions from them, namely the masters of the Mishnayot and Barayot. And as stated in Masechet Avot, and he quotes from Pirkei Avos, Moshe received Torah from Sinai and transmitted it to Yehoshua to the elders to the prophets, and the prophets transmitted it to the men of the Great Assembly. The men of the Great Assembly to Shimon HaTzadik, Shimon HaTzadik to Antigonos, Antigonos to Yosef ben Yoezeh, and to Yosef ben Yochanan of Yerushalayim, and they transmitted it to Yoshua ben Parachia and Nittai of Arbel, and they transmitted it to Yehuda ben Tabai and to Shimon ben Shattach, and they transmitted it to Shemaiah and Avtalion, from them to Shammai and Hillel, from them to Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai to Rabbi Eliezer, and Rabbi Yoshua and Rabbi Gamliel, and Rabbi Elazar ben Arach, and Rabbi Yosef HaKohen, and Rabbi Shimon ben Nesanel, from them to Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, and Rabbi Tarfon, and Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, from them to Rabbi Meir, and Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yossi, and Rabbi Shimon, and Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, our holy master, who gathered the contents of the Mishnah and arranged them in order, divided them into chapters and compiled them in a work. It is the basis of the entire tradition on which we rely in our Torah. So we're going to end the episode there. A very comprehensive look at the study of the Torah and the types of people and the transmission of our holy knowledge, how the Mitzorah happened and who it happened through. The next episode we're going to discuss the 10 levels of belief and service.